My name is Molly Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of UB Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness. And I'd like to welcome you to our series, 52 Weeks of Leadership, giving you what you need to lead in 2021. This is episode 6 already. And today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Charles Lindsey present on leading through analytics. And he is an associate professor of marketing at our UB School of Management. His specialty is consumer behavior, advertising, branding, marketing, strategy, e-commerce, and digital marketing. If his name is familiar to you, you may have seen him quoted in Forbes, Fortune, NPR Marketplace, and Washington Post. He is also the faculty director of executive and professional MBA program, and he is here to talk to you about analytics in a way that he calls light and airy. So I'm really excited for us to get started. If you're here today, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and you're welcome to throw some comments and questions up there. We'll be finishing up a little bit before 12:30 to answer some questions, so stick around. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Dr. Chuck Lindsey.
Well, thank you, Molly, for that introduction. It's great to be here today to talk about leading through analytics. I promise, it's a heavy topic, I know, but it's going to be light and airy, no quiz, no formulas, no numbers. We're just really going to talk about how to instill an analytics culture, an effective analytics culture in your firms. So I just want to give you a little background. I first developed an interest in analytics early in my career when I was working in accounting. I started in cost accounting for a division of Pfizer, switched over to financial accounting, worked for a bank in St. Louis. They were ultimately acquired by Bank of America. My interest in analytics blossomed further when I went back to earn my PhD, and I got a minor in quantitative methods. And for the last 10 years, I've been teaching statistical analytics to our executive MBAs, and more recently, digital marketing analytics to our full-time MBAs and website analytics in our MS, Management Information Systems program. So today, we're going to talk about some do's and don'ts and some best practices when it comes to analytics and metrics. And we're going to keep it light. What I'm going to talk about applies really to any functional area in business or otherwise. And then what I'll do at the end, though, is I've chosen people analytics, given that I think the constituency group here today. I've chosen people analytics to talk about some new ideas. After we go through those best practices and do's and don'ts, we'll talk about some new ideas happening right now in people analytics that I think you'll be interested in. So let's go ahead and get started. Oops. So I was going to talk about myself a little bit, but Molly did a great job of that. So let me skip this that second slide. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to talk about 5 no-nos, and then I'll talk about 3 do's. I preface the don'ts with the analogy to natural gas and electricity. Natural gas and electricity can heat your home very nicely. It can burn it down. So these first 3 don'ts, these are universal don'ts when it comes to analytics and building an analytics culture. But these first 3 don'ts were actually mentioned in a 2019 Harvard Business Review article by Michael Harris and Bill Taylor, and I have I'll have links at the end of this deck for you folks. And so they mentioned these 3, and so let's talk about them. Don't number 1, don't let the metric become the strategy. All of a sudden, the metric itself becomes the strategy, and you lose sight. Managers, employees all of a sudden lose sight of the strategy and why we're tracking the metric to begin with, which is to give us some insight as to whether we're making progress when it comes to a particular strategy or not. So we don't want to let the metric become the strategy. And I'll say more about that on the next slide. And I'll actually talk a bit more about that when I provide an example after don't number 2. So don't number 2, don't use a standalone or singular metric to track a strategy. Strategies and business goals almost always are multidimensional in nature. And so the last thing we really want to do is to just track progress with respect to a business goal, business outcome, or strategy using one metric. And so the example here, both for Don't 1 and 2, Wells Fargo, we know what happened to Wells Fargo over the last couple of years, and it really stemmed in large part due to them not adhering to not following the first two don'ts that we've talked about today. And specifically what happened, it had to do with a focus on cross-selling as a metric. And now we all know what cross-selling is. You own a product for a service, you own a product or a service of a firm, and they try to get you to buy another product or service. And Wells Fargo focused on cross-selling as almost a singular measure of customer management success. Now, there are a lot of ways to gauge customer management success: loyalty, retention, repeat purchase activity. But they really implemented almost a singular focus on cross-selling. And it led to, first of all, employees and financial managers really letting the metric become the strategy. And they just started focusing on how many financial products they could cross-sell to existing customers that already owned one financial product. And then they pretty much focused on doing that exclusively and ignored other very important factors when it comes to customer management success. I'll talk a little bit more about Wells Fargo on the second slide. So let's move on to don't number 3. Don't use a top-down approach. We want grassroots support. We want employee and middle manager buy-in when it comes to developing metrics, analytics and metrics. Which ones are important? Which ones are we going to track? And that's really the case when it comes to almost every area, isn't it? Why would it be different, though, in analytics? And it's not. But sometimes when it comes to the technical stuff, we forget our common sense. And so we don't want to employ a top-down approach. And the example here would be Google's Hippo model. In the early days of analytics, Google used to go to conferences and companies and actually make fun of managers. That's when you know you're really good. You have a product that everybody needs. You can make fun of people and they still keep coming back. So they would make fun of managers and how decisions were made. And they called it the Hippo model because it stood for the highest paid person in the organization. Top down decided what metric we were going to follow as a company. And so Google went around and they actually had a hippo that they would bring to conferences and wheel into companies. They would say, don't do that. Stop doing that. Not a good idea. Leads to all kinds of motivational issues and employee sabotage behavior if there's not buy-in. So let's now go to the second slide of don'ts. And it's interesting. The same year, 2019, that the first article came out in Harvard Business Review, Don't Let Metrics Undermine Your Business, where they talked about those first 3 don'ts, a second article came out by Michael Schrage at MIT. And he published it in the Sloan MIT Management Review, where he talked about all 3 of those don'ts from the first slide that the authors in the first article talked about. And then he added some don'ts. And I want to talk about 2 of them here. And he put a twist on don't number 1 from the first slide. And he quoted the great Cambridge University anthropologist, Marilyn Strathern. And the quote is this: once a measure becomes a target, guess what? It ceases to be a good measure. So that's really another way of saying, isn't it? Don't let the measure become the strategy, because you lose sight of the forest for the trees. You just focused on cross-selling. Go back to the Wells Fargo example, not to continue to pick on them. you're focused on cross-selling. It really becomes the strategy. And you just forget that customer management success is a multi-dimensional construct. We need multiple metrics to really get at that. So don't number 4, from the Schrage paper, not thinking through the implications of compensation. Wells Fargo had a line, and it was developed by their C-suite team and pushed out to financial managers that worked with clients. 8 is great. 8 accounts per customer. Somebody has a money market. Let's see if we can interest them in a CD, different financial insurance products, so forth and so on. 8 is great. And not really thinking through the kind of bad behavior that would lead to in terms of hard selling tactics, and even the opening of non-existent customer accounts and fraud. And so that is don't number 4. Really want to think about how you tie compensation to different metrics. You never want to just tie it to one metric for a strategy, and you have to be careful about how heavily tied it is to a particular metric. Don't number 5, fail to align metrics and strategy. And really, this is the most important one in my mind. Failing to align metrics with strategy. Great example comes from Avinash Kaushik. And he has a blog, and I have all of this information for you, the last 2 slides. He has a blog, Occam's Razor. It's one of the most widely read analytics blogs in the world. And he talks about, in the early days of analytics, he was in charge of generating reports for different departments. And he had to be out for a couple of weeks. And he came back and he forgot, according to him, he forgot to notify the departments that the reports weren't going to get sent for a couple of weeks. And you know how this story is going to end. He came back, no emails, nobody inquired about the reports. And so I think so often what we measure it's not aligned. It's not intimately tied to the key strategies and business goals. And because of that, we're just collecting data and crunching numbers and generating reports just to do it. And really, it's those metrics aren't driving or letting us know how well we're doing when it comes to our key business outcomes and strategies. And so nobody's really reading those reports, or they read them because they have to read them, but they're really not impactful metrics. They really don't matter. I guess the last thing I'll say about that is the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. When we have impactful, transformative metrics tied to the very most important strategies and business goals that the firm is pursuing, then those metrics are effective. And guess what? We can think about becoming more efficient in how we generate that data. And the efficiency that allows us to actually extract more value out of something that's effective to begin with. But effective is always more important, right? Because efficiency without effectiveness, it doesn't matter. So that's don't number 5. I want to spend a little bit more time on don't number 5, because in my mind, that's the most important don't. How do we align metrics and strategy? Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that the questions are always more important than the answers. When I was in my early days in industry, I had a mentor that would always say this. And at first, I was a little too timid to inquire further and let the person know I really didn't understand what they were talking about. And then after a few years, I understood. The answers don't matter, right? If the questions aren't important, no one cares. Those are those reports that get generated that no one reads, or they just kind of read in a perfunctory manner. And so we need to always start with the questions, and they need to be important questions tied to the most important goals and strategies in the firm. And then we think about metrics. And the second very important conversation that we need to have when it comes to aligning metrics and strategy, avoiding status quo bias. And I'm going to give two examples here. I'm going to give an example from my own career. And what happens when I go out very often and work with companies, normally the first day or so, I get managers upset because they typically want to show me data. They want to show me what they've been doing. They want to show me what they've been collecting. And I tell them, I don't care. I don't want to see what you've been collecting. I don't want to see what you've been doing. I want to go in open-minded. I want to talk to me about your business objectives, your business outcomes, your key strategies. And then let's have a discussion about, ideally, what are the metrics that would give us a really good sense each quarter, whether we're meeting those objectives and goals and strategies. If the metric, if this metric increases by 2%, we would have a pretty good sense that we're going in the right strategic direction when it comes to this strategy or that strategy. And so I want to talk about strategies and objectives and goals, and then I want to put in metrics that are forward thinking. They're formative, they're future oriented, and they will give us a really good idea if we track those. They're going to be really important to track because they're going to give us a really good idea whether we are making progress vis-a-vis our most important objectives. And then they get it. But for the first couple of hours, they're normally a little upset with me. You know, we got all this ready for you. We cooked you this big meal, Chuck, this big data meal. And so the second example, Paul D. Podesta and Moneyball. You baseball fans, you're probably familiar with the 2003 Hollywood movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt. And you know, an approach to analytics is impactful when Hollywood makes it into a movie, because let's face it, analytics, okay? And so Paul D. Podesta was hired by Billy Beane, the manager of the Oakland A's, to come in and apply metrics and analytics and quantitative thinking to making baseball decisions. And they kind of went in and took a look at everything, and they realized that the holy grail, if you will, the main statistic that was had been tracked for the last 3-4 decades, 100 years in baseball, batting average, really wasn't the right metric to track that slugging percentage. It actually explained wins and losses better than batting average, and really changed baseball thinking and ushered in this wave of analytics. And now, of course, every sports team in almost every area, they have a cadre, they have an analytics staff. And so challenge the status quo. Just because you've been collecting A, B, C, and D doesn't mean that you should be collecting data when it comes to those metrics. Re-examine your metrics, and are they really transformative? Are they really impactful? And then finally, and I tell managers this, a blank placeholder is better than identifying and tracking the wrong metric, right? Better to be in no relationship than in the wrong relationship. Better to say, let's put a pin in it. Let's put a Post-it note there. We're not sure how we're going to, what metric right now would effectively track whether we're making progress with this business goal or not. So let's just put a pin in it right now. Better to do that than track metrics that don't matter and waste time and money. Next slide, a few do's. 3 do's. As I said earlier, do number 1, keep it simple. Occam's razor and the 3 C's. I want to talk about Occam's razor and the 3 C's. So I mentioned Avinash Kaushik, Silicon Valley legend. He has a blog entitled Occam's razor, but Occam's razor is actually a principle. And the principle is and I'm just going to distill it here in kind of an off-the-cuff way. The principle here is KISS. Keep it simple, superstar. Keep it simple, superstar. If you keep the analytics simple and the metrics simple, in general, they tend to actually be better metrics. But, and this is key, a key byproduct, people start talking about metrics. They start discussing metrics in your firm more. It's more likely they'll get used by consumers in your firm, internal consumers, to actually drive business decisions because people start to understand because you've kept it simple. And then the 3 C's, consistency, inexpensiveness, cheap, consistent, cheap, and convenient. Metrics should be consistent. They should be cheap to collect data with respect to, and it should be convenient to collect that data. And consistency is actually the most important thing here, because we want metrics that over quarters, over time, really those metrics are exhibiting a nice correlation and ideally a causal relationship with the objectives and business goals and strategies that you're using those metrics to track, to see if you're making progress with respect to your most important strategies. So there needs to be a nice causal, consistent causal relationship there. You feel like you can rely on that metric. Number 2, the second do, always follow up with what and why. And this requires both quantitative and qualitative data. The most hardcore data scientist will tell you that you really can't get to the why without talking to people. You need to use qualitative data. The quantitative data, clickstream data, website data, training program scores, the employment funnel, right? You've got the employment funnel, you've got the recruiting funnel, and you know that there are certain pain points where your percentage is higher when it comes to attrition. And when we talk about attrition after an employee has been hired. So we've got the funnel, we've got the talent recruiting funnel. So that's not really attrition, but people are dropping out at certain points and you know where the problems are. The percentages are higher. And then attrition after someone's been hired, different departments, different types of positions. Yet the quantitative data will tell you what and where the problems are. You need qualitative data to really understand why it's happening. So you need to marry quantitative data and qualitative data. And then number 3, be selective. The Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, basically says that, look, most of our desirable business outcomes arise because of a very limited number of behaviors. 80% of what we want, we get that through 20% of our customers, 20% of employee behaviors. And so the same thing is true when we're talking about metrics and analytics. We want to be really selective in terms of the metrics that we're using. Really think about that, really reevaluate how we're collecting data, what metrics we're collecting data on right now, and be very selective so that the metrics that we use going forward are truly impactful. They're truly transformative. That is how we start to instill an effective analytics culture. And so just to wrap up, I said I'd wrap up by talking about the people analytics area. So I've got 2 slides really quick. So a quick snapshot of the people analytics area. And those don'ts, those do's apply to every functional area. But just to talk about some new ideas in the area of people analytics. So I've got a couple of quotes. The first one by Dave Zielinski, SHRM, delivery of people data is success in itself rather than striving to answer the most pressing business questions with that data. That was just 2019, he's saying. And then less than a third of these companies, and this was based on 100, 1/5, 20% of the Fortune 500. Less than a third of these companies have HR analytics that measures the relationship between HR and processes and people and business impact. Basically, he goes, Janet Marler and John Boudreau in the International Journal of Human Resource Management, they go on to say that, you know what, about 70% of firms report collecting a lot of data and tracking a lot of metrics, but most are efficiency metrics. They're not effectiveness metrics that really speak to business impact. And so there's a book that I came across, and I love it. I just want to bring it to your attention. It's entitled The CMO of People, and it's by David Krillman and Peter Navin. And this is what David Ulrich has to say about this book. This work reinforces that HR is not about HR, but about delivering business impact. And Krillman and Navin talk about HR as a revenue generator, as opposed to a profit center or a cost center. A revenue profit generator as opposed to a cost center. And so in this book, Krillman and Navin talk about a lot of new ideas with respect to people analytics and really developing an effective people analytics culture that makes a profound business impact. And a lot of companies are now using many of these ideas. But two that I just want to, I've got a minute or two left, I just want to expose you to Net Promoter Scoring. Operations folks and marketing folks have long used Net Promoter Scoring to assess customer engagement. And Krillman and Navin said, well, basically their hypothesis, their premise was, why aren't we using Net Promoter Scoring, which gets used by a who's who of companies worldwide to, again, assess customer engagement? Why aren't we using that in an agile way to assess employee engagement and taking it back to our work teams and what have you? And then he also talks about, again, amongst many new ideas, employee lifetime value. That's been used in finance and marketing for a long time to value a firm's customer base. How much are customers worth? How financially? How much value do they bring to the firm? Different customers, different customer segments obviously stay with the firm for a greater period of time. And some segments stay not as long. And so that then affects how much those segments are worth financially. And that then allows us to think about how much we're willing to spend to acquire those different segments. Why aren't we doing that? Krillman and Navin broached this notion of why aren't we doing that to value our employees? How do we enhance employee value? I'm not talking about revenue per employee here. I'm talking about truly understanding if employee retention goes up by 2% here, how much incremental value does that add to the firm, as opposed to if retention goes up by 2% over here? And then factoring that into training programs and so on and so forth. So that's really it. I've got the final two slides, all the links to everything that I've talked about today. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Chuck, on behalf of CLOE, for volunteering your time to present analytics. You know, it's quite possible that too few leaders think about analytics when they think about leadership skills. And so I know there's a couple of questions in the chat about furthering their development in this area. So first one comes from Robin. Does UB offer an analytics certification program as continuing education, professional development for experienced professionals looking to develop this expertise? Chuck, can you speak to that?
There are certainly, yeah, that's a great question. There are certainly analytics courses that one can take that are offered by the university. We have a couple of degrees now at the master's level in analytics. In terms of a certificate program or a credential or a badge, I am not aware of any right now, but I am aware that one such program is in the works. and is currently being developed in terms of offering a certificate or a badge to working professionals? Great question.
And Chuck, a few people have asked about copies of your slides. We are planning to share this recording on our website. Just want to make sure that if people want to access these links, they can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I added these last two slides. I was hoping that some of the folks here today and might be watching after in the form of a recording would be interested in accessing this material and taking a bit of a deeper dive.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. You'll have an opportunity to hear Chuck again at our annual CLOE conference, which we'll be announcing more details about later this month, and that's on June 3rd. So thank you again for everybody. All 126 of you from around the world have joined us for our weekly series. Up next is Dr. Maura Beliveau, who's the Executive Director of our Center for Diversity Innovation. She's going to be talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, lessons for leaders. So please join us next Monday at noon. Thank you, everyone, and thanks again, Dr. Lindsey.
Be safe and well, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.